What's up, fight fans? This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Eddie Hearn, Keith Thurman, Tszyu. Get this. Matchroom promoter Eddie Hearn talks to Fight Hub about the launch of the PBC Amazon Prime, starting with pay-per-view event handled by Keith Thurman and Tszyu. Hearn admits that he thinks, as a fan, the card will provide a fun night of boxing, but doesn't see how any of the fights will drive a successful pay-per-view performance. He says, quote, "I think it's a good night of boxing. I think it's a bit of a botch job where it's just like throw a load of stuff together. The main event for me is very weak pay-per-view. I don't mind saying I find Keith Thurman quite an interesting character. He sort of disappeared for 2 years. He's come back to the press conference and he's like, his chat is interesting. The suit is interesting. He looks a bit older than he did before, and I'm not really sure what he's doing in the game or how hungry he is. I just feel like pay-per-view, historically, we know those kind of pay-per-views don't sell, and if it's a good card, it don't really matter because you have to grab the attention with a big headliner with that, whether that's Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia, whether that's Canelo against X, not Keith Thurman against Tszyu. That is not going to do good numbers on pay-per-view. As a night, I quite like it. I think as boxing fans, I'd buy it, but that's going to give you the numbers. Keith Thurman versus Tszyu is probably a fight I could probably say, you guys got to give me hundreds of fights to be made, and you would not say Keith Thurman and Tszyu, like you wouldn't. And I think, by the way, Tszyu will stop Keith Thurman 100%. And let me counterpunch. Will the fight do good? Maybe not. Because if they try to jack up the price and be greedy like we've seen them do with PBC, and they have these numbers so high, you know, and so the expectations of good fights have to match the price, and it doesn't. Like, the price is up here, and then, you know what I mean, and the competition and stuff is down here. Keith Thurman ain't been around. When has Keith Thurman fought? Mario Barrios? What was that, in 2022? Man, like, yeah, Eddie's right in that regard. Like, he's disappeared. He's always been charismatic. He's always been a self-promoting type fighter, which I love, okay? You don't have many of them in the sport, and Adrian Broner, let's face it, I don't think he has the drive or the ability no more. I think he can talk, but he can't walk. I think Keith Thurman can still do both. But then you have to ask yourself, up against a young, hungry guy like Tszyu, that you know he's big, he's strong, he has a nice variety of punches and all that. What does he have really to bring to the table? Most importantly, though, Keith Thurman is not a headliner right now. Keith Thurman is a guy that shouldn't be on pay-per-view right now. In fact, when they started, they were free TV. And I think that's what kind of crippled them, because once you do something like that and then you renege and go back to pay-per-view, you give them the mindset of these fighters being fighters that are willing to fight for a purse and only a purse in order to launch an idea of free television once again. Okay, so when you see Keith Thurman, yeah, him fighting Danny Garcia, that made sense because Danny Garcia was undefeated. Danny Garcia was the IBF champion at the time. No, he was the WBC, I believe. Okay, he was no, he wasn't. He was the WBA, I believe. Okay. Keith Thurman was also a belt holder. So they had a unification. That was worth pay-per-view. This isn't. Because Tszyu is not big enough to sell a pay-per-view or to really even be on a pay-per-view at this point. They're trying to push him and his interest, but that I don't think is that. Okay. They should have had that on Fox pay-per-view. Their numbers would have done really well because it's a good fight for what it is, but it's not a pay-per-view fight. They need to know the difference between pay-per-view fights and non-pay-per-view fights, and this isn't one of them. Now, you have to keep in mind of who's saying that. That's Eddie Hearn. Now, in this case, I think Eddie Hearn was just really being honest, but you have to keep in mind he is the competitor. You know what I mean? So He doesn't go around hating on people, though. So he's not like a Leonard Ellerby. A Leonard Ellerby will shit on everything except for his own circle and his own stuff going. So, but he's right, though. He's right. But just remember, you don't really know, if Eddie is saying that just because he doesn't like the idea of it being on Prime. But I do agree with him. It ain't like I don't agree with him. I do agree with him. This should be, if they were going to give a reasonable price for this, you know what it would be? $29.99. That's what this fight would be worth if it was pay-per-view. And then maybe, just maybe, people would buy it because it's not off the rocker. It's not twice as much. It's not $69.99. It's not $79.99. It's not even $59.99. It's not that expensive. $29.99 would be an ideal price here in the States. Hell, in the UK, it should be $10. You guys don't like to pay for shit over there like that. Especially not that expensive, which is smart, right? But yeah, I do think so. I do think that Tszyu fighting Keith Thurman, I'm going to watch it, because I'm really interested to see what Keith Thurman does with what Tszyu does with Keith Thurman and vice versa. What Keith Thurman can still do to this day. He may be on his way out, but we will see what that's about. Bars. You guys tell me what you think of Eddie Hearn. Doubting the numbers will do well on Tszyu versus Keith Thurman. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunch. Peace!